right. So this is what I just mentioned, right? So there are different avenues within the PowerShell community on how you can actually learn PowerShell itself, or how you can contribute or get involved in the community itself. Now, as a part of that, I'll also talk about some of my favorite and most used PowerShell modules. Community has done an excellent job of releasing several open source modules, and I have been using a lot of them within my work on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to demonstrate how I've been using some of those modules, and maybe you get some ideas out of it as well. So before we go there, just talk a little bit about the community, PowerShell and the community itself, right? Back in 2008, when I started working on PowerShell, or learning PowerShell, I should say, really, right? I've never used PowerShell before that. It was just probably 2008 was when the first version of PowerShell was released as a part of Windows Vista. So there was not too much content out there within the community, or out on the internet, that talks about really how to use PowerShell and why we need really PowerShell. And that was the time I did my first PowerShell training at work. Okay, and no one really had an idea why they really needed PowerShell. Everyone was so comfortable doing VB scripting. Everyone was so comfortable doing Python and Windows. No one had a clue about why PowerShell was really needed, right? And unfortunately, I failed to explain that as well in the first place, right? So when we actually started looking at PowerShell back in 2008, it was, people were asking me questions like, why do I really need a verb-noun kind of a syntax, right? Like get process, get child item. Why do I really need that? Why can't I just run a .exe file, grab the output and parse it, right? So there was not enough convincing content out there within the community at that point in time. That's when we actually started building the community itself. If you actually look at some of these trends, this is about how the PowerShell search trends within the Google how people actually start searching for PowerShell is something that this graph really shows. This is the time around 2006. That's when PowerShell was introduced initially. Like there was a technical preview build, and that's when the overall thing started. And around 2008 was when it was released as the first version, and then so on. Interestingly, you see the blip there? That's back in 2004. I think that must be one of the PowerShell team members, Jeffrey Snow or Bruce Pratt, actually searching on Google to find out if PowerShell is being used really or not. I mean, that word itself, right? And then we had in 2016, the open source version of PowerShell that came out, right? And that opened the doors for the community to go influence PowerShell as a language itself, the features of PowerShell itself. Now, see this. This graph is something that Joey had shown yesterday in his session keynote. Now, this is the amount of pull requests that actually have gone into the PowerShell repo, which is the open source PowerShell repository. And if you see this, community is at around 54% approximately, 53.35, right? That's huge. The contributions that the community has been adding into the PowerShell engine or the PowerShell features itself is huge now. Now, if you actually convert that into some sort of financial market terminology, or the investment banking terminology, 53.35% basically means this community owns PowerShell, right? Not in literal terms. The code that we contribute, this community that's contributing to PowerShell repository actually implies that we kind of own PowerShell itself now. Okay. Now, then what is Microsoft doing? Of course, they own the product. They drive your features, what has to go into the product itself. But community is what is really helping fix bugs, some of the bugs that the community has been seeing, and also adding new features. Many of you must have attended sessions from Stefan here, right? He has done a lot of performance improvements within the PowerShell core engine itself. We have others like Mark Krause, who has been working on the web commandlets for PowerShell core. Excellent work from the community there. Now, This is one aspect of community contributions that we have within PowerShell space. And I would say, when I said we trust in the community, it's the PowerShell community that we trust in. I don't know about many other communities. I'm not involved in, let's say, the Python or any other community, but PowerShell is one of those communities that is excellent from a support point of view, excellent from people point of view. Now, what type of avenues that this community has been working on? For example, if you have to learn PowerShell from ground up, what is that this community really provides and how you can actually get involved, right? There are different places where you can contribute as well. Books, of course, there are many folks who have written books. Most of these things are commercial, right? I mean, books have been in a commercial space only. I've written a couple of books which I kind of based on mostly desired state configuration. But there's one book that stands out for me, which is the PowerShell conference book. This is, again, a commercial one, but it is written as a part of community effort. Right? There are a bunch of folks who got together and started a conference book, and the proceeds from this book actually go to sponsoring a few folks scholarship to PowerShell.org summit, the PowerShell summit in the US. There's a CFP that opened, I think it closed also last week. They're releasing a new version of this book, and you can actually contribute the book as well if you're really interested in doing so. The second thing, community blogs. So, like I said, when I started especially, there was nothing much. 2010 was when I became an MVP, and 2011 was when I got together with folks like Alex and a few other PowerShell MVPs at that point in time to start PowerShell magazine, right? So how many of you have heard about PowerShell magazine? That's a decent number. Okay. All right. So PowerShell magazine was the only exclusive PowerShell online content at that point in time, right? Later we had either a PowerShell.com that come up with PowerShell related stuff. PowerShell.org has now a lot of blog posts and etc. PowerShell District has a bunch of PowerShell content as well now, specific to PowerShell again. PowerShell magazine has had like 65 plus contributing authors. So a lot of things, with respect to the language itself or the core features within PowerShell, etc., we have written there. I should admit that it's not very active these days, but we have a revival plan there. Community conferences and user groups. You're at one of the best conferences out here, PowerShell Conference EU. We have DevOps Summit within the US region, PowerShell Conference Asia, which used to happen in Singapore, now moved to Bangalore, India. I'm co-organizing that with a bunch of other PowerShell MVPs and other community folks. In fact, we're doing our first Bangalore event in September this year, September 19th to 21st. If you're interested, just hit the URL, PSConf Asia, and we'll be glad to host you guys there. PSD UK is another kind of an event that happens in the UK. It's a one-day event, and there are again international speakers coming there and speaking there as well. Talking about user groups, there are multiple of them. You have many user groups in Europe. We were the first one to start in India, Bangalore user group. So that's our logo. It's PowerShell Bug, B-U-G, Bangalore user group. All right. Moving on, you have live streamers also, live coders are also within this community right now, right? This is another way people have been actually showing the people who are learning PowerShell and basically how to code with the best practices in mind, etc. They just open up their coding session to everyone, live streaming. They make mistakes. They learn from those mistakes. Then actually, in that process, you also learn quite a bit, right? So Mark was the first one to kind of start. He's at LinkedIn now. And there are a bunch of others who started. I have done a couple of sessions as well. Chrissy, who is also at this conference, is very active. She has probably like tens of hours of live streaming already recorded there. There is this PowerShell Live is the Twitter handle, if you want to follow that. If you follow that, basically, you get regular updates on who's streaming at what time and so on. And you have, that's the channel, twitch.tv PowerShell Live. That's where all the videos actually get consolidated as well. There is a session this afternoon, just after this session, I think. Yeah, 12:25. Tyler from the Microsoft PowerShell team, Chris, and a bunch of others will be talking about their experiences with live coding, live streaming with Twitch. And you can join that session as well if you're interested in that. Community forums, we have a bunch of them. Stack Overflow is my favorite. Of course, after Twitter, by the way. Right? Whenever I have a question, I just hit Twitter first and see if I get an answer or not, and then I hit the other forums. Because Twitter, I know my community friends are eager to help. You know, the moment you post a question on Twitter, people actually jump and try to answer that. So I really like that space. Stack Overflow, Superuser, PowerShell.com, and PowerShell.org. All these places have different set of individuals actually moderating the questions and answering your questions there. On the Stack Overflow, I have an interesting demo there. Let's just go. So Stack Overflow has this concept called Stack Exchange, rather, has a Data Explorer API. They have a SQL backend. You can use the Explorer API to go grab the details about specific tags on Stack Overflow, etc. So I've already done that. I have a query results here set. If you actually look at that, it's something looks like this. You have a tag name, question count, and so on. Now, if you look at the data in a grid view, this is how it basically looks. So the PowerShell has 68,754 something with an answer percent of almost 87% of the questions answered there, right? Now, there's an interesting way to visualize that information. I'm using Google Chart APIs here, which basically gives me a type of a chart, a visualization as an image. So what I'm essentially doing is taking what is relevant for me to create that chart here, the tag name and the question count, and just feeding that into the URL that I have here. Okay, there's a specific format of the parameters that you have to specify to this query string. So once you do that, I get the image locally. Right, I have now the entire pie chart actually saved on my system locally. Now this is another beauty here. So this piece of code here is again a part of the VS Code PowerShell extension. You can create HTML content views within VS Code itself. So now if you want to visualize something, you can actually open that as another tab within VS Code editor itself, right? So this is again a part of community work that has been done within the VS Code extension development. So when I run this, you see that? So that's as simple as that, right? Now, it's actually embedded, if you see that, it's actually embedded into my own editor here within VS Code itself. Right? So it's a great use of the extension, the commands that we have, editor services command that we have here within VS Code. The next one that you have within the community is, of course, the open source modules, right? People have been writing quite a bit. PowerShell inbox has certain level of support with respect to what Microsoft product teams have been writing, with respect to what the PowerShell core engine itself supports really. But the extensions that you basically see as a part of open source modules are, for different products or different ways of handling your CI/CD pipelines and so on, right? There are close to 4,000 plus modules in PowerShell Gallery. And of course, there are hundreds of many more such modules, lying just in GitHub repositories, never published to any of these PowerShell galleries or anything where the distribution can actually happen. These are some of my favorite modules. This is again a simple subset. I don't have a full list of my modules that I use every day, but this is just a simple subset here. I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 of them here, not everything. So let's see some of the real-world use cases for some of these modules in my day-to-day work. So let's start with PS Kwans. How many of you have seen PS Kwans? That's good. So a PS Kwans module by Joel is basically about how you can learn PowerShell by using an interactive learning method, right? We have learned PowerShell reading blogs, we have been reading books, we have been watching videos and learning PowerShell, but this is something that makes you hands-on really, right? It uses Pester in the backend. You have to run a couple of Pester tests, or rather, there are a bunch of scripts that are Pester tests basically. So it will basically force you to solve a puzzle. A Kwan is basically, in the Chinese terms, it's a puzzle, right? It's a riddle. So you basically solve a riddle, measure your karma, and that's when you basically progress in your learning. So let's see that. So I have this module which is already installed, PS Kwans. If I do a get command on this, so these are the basic commands that I have within that. Okay. What happens when you install this module is it basically takes a bunch of Pester tests, puts it in your user documents folder, right? Basically a documents folder and user profile. So you can actually see that. Not loaded. Interesting. Is it not there? That's interesting. Sure. Let's see. It's not there. Yeah. It was there 2 days ago. All right. Anyway, if you really want to see it, it's actually in my documents folder here somewhere. Right. If you see here, there are the Kwans. These are the different Pester scripts that I have, right, within the module.
Can you install the previous version of PS5?
I can, yeah. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So there's, I can actually give you some ready-made tips also about PowerShell, usage of certain things within PowerShell. Just do a get advice. Like you see here in this, here it basically talks about PowerShell profile scripts. So there is a command here which basically is about register advice. When you do that, every time you open PowerShell console, it becomes very slow. I don't suggest doing that, but every time you open PowerShell console, it pops up a tip for you, a tip of the day kind of a thing, right? So the way you start with this module is run the measure karma commandlet. When you do that, it starts executing all the Pester tests that are part of PS Kwans module, and it tells you where exactly it is failing. So right now, if you see, my enlightenment is around 4 out of 246 tests, right? So where it is failing in something about a variable assignment. That's the thing that damaged my karma, all right? Now the way I fix that is I have to meditate on this. So when I meditate, it opens up the script. Now, which was the one that failed? It's about variables Kwans. Now I'm going to go here. It is this script. As you basically see, this is just a regular Pester script. It has enough annotation for you to really understand what exactly you need to fix. In this case, the first test that failed basically says, names give succinct descriptions to pieces of reality. there's a variable $50 equals to 50, $value equals to something, right? Now, if you're learning basically PowerShell, you basically have to use an equality operator here, which is -eq, right? When you say $value equals to $50, value is not set to anything in this case. So all you have to do is just remove those underscores, make it 50. Now, this case, the first test will pass. Okay? Then he's doing a set variable named greeting value hello. What you basically get when you access this variable is the value hello, the string value. Now you replace that here as is, and you can actually make the second test pass. Now, since I know what is actually happening, I'm able to fix it right away. But for those who are actually getting started with PowerShell, they have to go read up on the internet or try a few things themselves before they actually come and fix this test, right? So now let's just measure the karma again. I must have progressed a little bit. 2 more tests, I think. Right? 5. So this is one way. We have known a few people in the community who are actually trainers who are using this module as a part of their training exercises as well to the the students that are coming into the classes. I kind of find it very interesting. I've tried it myself in my team as well, with a couple of folks. As they start reading a book or a blog or the documentation itself about how to use PowerShell language, syntax, and the operators, etc., they come to this, Kwans module, fix some of those special test cases, and they see how they're actually progressing within the learning path itself. The next one is the very interesting one, import Excel. So there was a session yesterday about documentation with PowerShell, right, without having Word and so on, other applications, etc. Import Excel is another excellent module that exactly does something without actually installing Excel, right? Now, I can generate dashboards, I can generate reports of my pester tests, etc., without having Excel installed anywhere. I can just use this module, generate those beautiful reports, and so on. It's written by Doug Finke. GitHub repository is there. Let's look at this as well. Now I have a couple of examples here in this. So the first one, if you have seen the Twitter yesterday, I've kind of tweeted this script also. psconf.eu, there's a JSON file which basically has the speakers and sessions, 2 different JSON files. Now, what I really wanted is, since the app may not be working all the time, I just wanted to create an Excel spreadsheet with the latest content always, right? So the way we have done it is, I've just imported the module here, and then created the JSON objects from the URL that I have. And then this is how you basically use import Excel, right? We're creating a session track information. The first one is about all sessions, all tracks, basically. The select object, I'm selecting a few properties which are coming out of that JSON object from the sessions, $sessions. And then I'm creating this Excel file. I'm naming the worksheet as all tracks and just giving it some other beautification things like, title and the size of the title and so on. Okay? When I execute it, nothing really happens. The file itself gets created. You can see that, psconf.eu 2019 XLS. Okay. I'm going to add some more information into it. Now we have 3 tracks here. This is one of the tracks, and we have 2 other tracks somewhere. I'm going to add each individual track also as a sheet, right? So for that, I'm using this. It's again the same method. It's just that I'm iterating over the different track information from the sessions JSON. And the last thing, I'm going to add the speakers sheet as well. There's a different JSON that I have, $speakers in this case. I'm going to add that into the Excel spreadsheet as well. And the last thing, kind of want to highlight where the speakers are coming from really, right? There are multiple countries that we are all kind of representing. So I'm going to add a pie chart. Is it a pie chart? No, it's a column cluster chart, a bar chart basically. I'm going to add that as well. Everything in PowerShell, right? I've not opened Excel yet. And finally, once this is all done, I'm going to show the chart. Okay. You see this? Now I have the entire information in Excel here. This is track-wise, and these are all the speakers we have here. And this is kind of a chart that I added. So this count is coming actually from the PowerShell itself. Now you can actually do pivot tables here. One of the things I was trying to do until the last minute I came here was to basically add conditional formatting into this so that whenever you open this spreadsheet, it will actually tell you which session is going on right now in each of those tracks. Based on the time, you can add conditional formatting within Excel itself. Right, the import Excel module basically supports that. So you can add those rules within PowerShell and import them into the Excel spreadsheet that you just created. So any point in time you want to do those conditional formattings, like if value is XYZ, you want to highlight a specific row. All those things can be actually done through PowerShell itself. Very useful for kind of creating your dashboards, creating reports out of your diagnostics tests that you run within your infrastructure and so on. So that's how I've been using. So I'll maybe show you one of the examples here. So this is one of my pester test report, right? This is something that I generate as a part of the infrastructure validation, the operations validation suite that I run at work. So on a regular basis, it runs and generates this kind of a dashboard for me. The first one that you see is a summary with all the charts and everything. The second one, it actually shows you what are the different tests that were run. And when there is a failure message, this is all, again, coming from Pester directly. This is not something that I've done in Import Excel. Pester has a new feature, which is the -because parameter. You can actually specify when a test fails, you can specify what was expected for the test, actually. So this information is coming from there. Now I have all my other node tests that I've been running. Again, for the failed messages, failed cases, I have the reasons for it. Right. So this is kind of a useful thing. On a regular basis, all of my infrastructure servers basically run Pester on a regular basis. They generate these reports. The moment I go in, I can actually go take a look at all the reports that were generated by the clusters, and I can mail them over to whoever is concerned about it. And the next module, actually a couple of modules. One is Polaris. How many were you there in the Polaris and PS-HTML session yesterday? Okay. You all liked it? Great. So Polaris is a web server framework. You can actually create simple web servers within Polaris. You can create REST API within that. PS-HTML is more of a DSL, which basically gives you, you can generate HTML content on the fly dynamically using just PowerShell. You don't have to write any HTML by hand. You can actually generate that HTML content. So I've been using this in a very interesting way, which I'll show you in a bit. But before that, let's go see a few things around Polaris and PS-HTML standalone first. Right. Now this is a PS-HTML script that I have here. If you look at it, once you load the module, you get these keywords like HTML, head. These are all the HTML elements, basically, right? Once I have these elements, I can specify what I want to really do within that. This is more of a static kind of a form, but I'll show you something more dynamic where I create table entries and create images and so on dynamically within PS-HTML itself. So once I run this, it just generated a HTML file. It should be here, right? So from PowerShell script, I'm actually generating this entire HTML file. Now, I can access this. For example, whatever Excel report I showed you, instead of doing it in Excel, I can now use PSHTML and then generate a HTML report also. With the method that I showed about creating those charts using Google API with PSHTML, both combined, I can actually create dashboards again just within HTML and nothing else. Right? I don't even need import Excel there. Now, but if I want to really serve that content, so that someone can actually access my server, see the reports on a regular basis, like from a web page, etc., I need a web server running on it. So for that, I don't necessarily have to put any IAS or Apache kind of a web server. I can do that completely in something called Polaris. Polaris is maintained by Microsoft PowerShell team. Tyler does that. He has a couple of community members who are contributing to that as well. Using this, you can actually create your REST APIs, or you can actually create web servers with views provided by PSHTML. Right? In this case, we have already generated a static HTML page. Let us see how we can serve that content. So this module basically has multiple commandlets. The Polaris get route basically creates an endpoint, a web server endpoint, which responds to your get HTTP methods, right? HTTP has different methods like get, post, delete, and so on. So this is a get route that we are creating here. And then the second one is a post route. So if you look at the HTML that we just generated, it has a form within that, right? For that form, I've specified the action as /myresponse. Now, whenever someone clicks submit on the form, the /myresponse has to be called from the local web server, and that's what we're implementing as a post route here. That's what we have a post route here now. So let's execute this and see. So that just started a web server at the port 9000. Let's try to access that. No? Interesting. What did we change? The serving HTML, which is index.html. Where are we? Okay, that's a problem. I did not set the path, right? I did not set the path there. So let's do one thing. Let's open up again. This is one of the problems with Polaris is there's no clean way of actually restarting the web server today. That's one of the things that's still planned, I think. Okay. Let's go back. HTML is already there. I don't want to regenerate that. Let me just quickly check if I'm at the right path. I'm going to run this. Let's try one more time. Not found. Oh, man. My request index.html. That's okay. The route started actually. Even if I pop it, it doesn't matter now. No, let me just hard code it, just for the sake of presentation. So. That's too long. my response. Yeah. Index.html. Okay. Let's see one more time. It doesn't work all the time. Yeah. All right, so let's try one more time, and then we'll move on if it doesn't work. So I have 9,000. There's a subroute, which is my request. Let's try that. Okay. All right. So when I submit that, the response, whatever you basically see here within the response here, post response, it is actually taking the form submission, the elements from that, converting it to JSON, and then sending that as a response now. We have mentioned that content type as application JSON here. Right? Now this is very basic. You can do many more things with a combination of PS HTML and Polaris. I want to show you something that I have been using in my space. I work a lot on the software-defined storage infrastructures. We deploy these infrastructures using DSC. We do a lot of validations using Pester and so on. Now, all of this is kind of automated to a large extent, right? Now, as a part of that, when you have to deploy something at a customer site or within your lab, which has many unique parameters, every configuration is different, every infrastructure is different. It has its own parameters that you have to gather from the customer or within your infrastructure and then start the automation itself. Now, how do you know, given the type of infrastructure, what are the parameters that are required for the automation? Right? So we started looking at that, and we kind of made a bit of a UI using Polaris and PS HTML. Now this is running at 8080. There's already one web server running. Not sure if it will. Right? See, it's the same thing. It's Polaris, PS HTML, with a bit of bootstrap CSS out there. Nothing else. No other magic of JavaScript or anything. Everything's done plain, simple PowerShell in this case. Everything native, right? Just using Polaris and PowerShell, PS HTML. This is a wizard that we created. Now, there are different type of infrastructure. If you don't understand it, that's okay. It's basically about software-defined storage and what type of a different deployment types you can actually perform within the infrastructure. So you basically select all of this, what type of a network topology you have, what type of a NIC you're using. With the Mellanox NICs, of course, I just have the Rocky V2 configuration and nothing more. Once I specify these things, it will actually tell me, the API itself will tell me what are the different type of tasks that have to be performed to bring this up entire cluster, and these are the tasks that you have. And for each of those tasks, if there are dependencies, you can actually see those dependencies listed as well. Okay? Interesting piece. If you open the deployment manifest, for each of those tasks, it will actually tell you what are the parameters that are needed. A deployment person who's going on-site to do the service deployment, now you just have to fill in those details, start the tooling. It will actually go deploy the whole thing automatically. Okay? So it kind of makes it error-free, I mean, completely easy for these deployment guys to actually go out there and deploy things. There are other things here. We also give a task package. It's a set of PowerShell scripts. These are again auto-generated, right? Everything within PowerShell now, based on what type of infrastructure that you choose, we kind of auto-generate these PowerShell scripts, and the parameters that you have to specify within the deployment manifest are for these PowerShell scripts. And there's a task graph, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. It also shows you the same table that you have in terms of a dependency graph. Now, those yellow things are the ones that actually require a restart. Otherwise, there are tasks that are just hanging there without any dependencies. Otherwise, most of the other tasks are interconnected, right? They have dependencies and so on. So, one of the things which is in progress is documentation. Today I just have a bunch of links set here, but the idea is basically each of those PowerShell scripts, I have examples within the code itself. I have parameters defined with their help messages, etc. Now using PSHTML, I can actually generate the documentation for that specific infrastructure, very specific to the infrastructure deployment that my person is doing there. I can create the entire documentation set itself just for this specific infrastructure in a completely automated manner, right? Any questions so far? Great. Okay. So the question is about within the form, if you have seen, that's like a wizard. I have one question to another question. There's some interconnectivity, and the values or the options within the second question depend on the choice that you made in the first question, right? So the question is, how do I make that happen within Polaris or PSHTML rather, right? So if you look at this, let me just open. Let's go to the second page. Can you all see it there? Okay. So this is the home page. Once you select the type of infrastructure, what we're essentially doing here is within the form, this is basically a submit that you have here, an action. Now, each of these elements have a name also associated with that, right? Now, if you go look at this here, once the data comes to the second action, or whatever it is, the post action, we get a list of all the parameters that are actually coming out of that session, and then store them as hidden elements within the same form. You see this? There's an input type hidden. It doesn't show up on the form, but when someone submits that form, this information is sent back to the server as well, right? So that way, we kind of create that wizard type of a feel within that entire web page. So the data that you have specified in the first click is available throughout the wizard itself. So at any point in time you want to retrieve the values, you can actually do that. Cool. The next one, PS graph. How many of you have heard about PS graph? Okay. Once again, one of the things that I've just shown, which basically has the task dependency graph, is actually done in PS graph itself. Okay. So Kevin has done that. An excellent module again. I've been using it quite a bit in the documentation space. I could just show it in one of the examples. Let's see one more example of that. Now, once again, for this, I'm going to load some necessary support stuff. I'll tell you what it is. I have a DSA configuration script here, right? So within the DSA configuration script, I have multiple resources, and some of the resources have dependencies, okay? Now, this is probably the simplest configuration script I've put here, but I have some of the most complex scripts where I have references to multiple of those resource dependencies and so on. Now, let's say, for example, if I'm creating an entire infrastructure using DSE, I'm starting with my network topology configuration itself. I have to create a VM switch. I have to add virtual network adapters into it. Then I have to start adding IP address information. Then I configure the system to be in a domain, and so on, etc. Now, each of these configuration steps are interdependent, right? I first need a VM switch. Only then I can actually go create network adapters on top of that. Only once my network adapters are created, only then I can assign IP addresses. Only when there is a valid IP address, I can actually join a domain, and so on. So there are multiple interdependencies between all of this. One of the things that we have to make sure as a part of the deployments is to see that, I have these DSC configurations generated in a proper manner. And also, as a part of documentation, it's important for me to specify these dependencies as well, so that they can actually visualize the dependencies and follow the order. So this is the config file. Now going back to what I just loaded, this script basically here uses AST and then finds out different configuration items. It uses something called the configuration definition AST within PowerShell, and then brings out all the resource information and their dependencies and so on. It basically parses the entire script, out of which we create a dependency object, and then give that graph to the export PS graph commandlet from the PS graph module itself, right? So once that is done, I want to kind of see that as a part of, again, like I said, the VS Code HTML previews. So that's all I added here. And this is an editor command, basically adds that as a command option within VS Code. So that's what the register editor command does really. Now whenever someone calls this command, it takes the local context of the editor, the current file basically, and then gives it to my function. And the function generates a PNG file of the dependency graph. We kind of output that as a HTML preview. Let's see that. So I have sample.config open here. I'm pressing Shift-Alt-S. It brings up all the PowerShell additional commands. Select the last one. And there you go. So I have an entire dependency graph, which is actually shown for that particular configuration script I have within VS Code itself. Right? Very useful in creating documentation, automated documentation. In fact, we are working on something where we can actually generate HTML and PDF documents from Markdown, right? So in those cases, when I have these configuration scripts embedded into as a part of my infrastructure automation, I have my documentation as MD files. I can now combine PS HTML, PS Graph, and a bunch of other open source modules that we have, and then build this entire documentation in an automated manner. So moving on, we have one. How many of you heard about the universal dashboard? Very useful, right? A bit complex to get started with, but once you get started, it's kind of very useful. Okay, so this one sample that I have here. Most of you might have seen a server performance dashboard for more than an hour. Interesting. I left the thing open, so I probably have to select the community edition instead of doing this. That's running now. Let's see. There you go. Right. It's actually now a real-time server performance dashboard, which basically gives me the information in terms of my process utilization, memory utilization, and so on. Now, once again, the similar thing can be used. For example, the pester dashboard that I've shown you guys in Excel can be actually translated into this, right? Or the wizard that I've shown as a part of my deployment automation can be done in Universal Dashboard also. It's just that a choice of tools that you have that the community has been producing for us. Yeah. And now you've seen quite a bit about what the community has been doing, how they've published and so on, but how do you really publish your own module? Anyone published modules to PowerShell Gallery here? I suspect usual guys here. Yes. Okay. Now, how many of you know how to publish a module? Okay. All right. So there's a simple command for that in PowerShell itself. It's called publish module. No surprises there. I'm showing my API key. I'll go delete it anyway. I'll go delete it, so that's fine. So I have this module called PS Windows Admin Center, which is about actually managing Windows Admin Center commands within PowerShell right, connections. You can add, using this module, failover clusters, HCI clusters, Windows servers, Windows 10 systems, and so on in Windows Admin Center, just using PowerShell, nothing else. So this module, I just made some changes to it. I added some documentation. Now, don't do anything, Ben. So these are the different commands it has. Since I have the API key here, this is the API key. You basically get something from PowerShell Gallery. So if you go to my account here, you can actually see the API keys. I have one with full access. That's the worry now. Everyone has those pictures. All right. So now this is the command that I basically use. For this, what you have to do is publish the module in a place that PowerShell can actually retrieve. So that basically means the module has to be available at $env PS module path, right? So that it can actually discover that module and start uploading the module itself to PowerShell Gallery. A few things that you should know is when you're pushing these modules out there, just make sure you have enough meta information within that so that it's easy for folks to go search for your module. That's basically captured in the PSD1 file itself. Okay. Now, some important stuff here is the tags. Make sure you put enough tags. There's a project URI. If there's a license and release notes, etc., use that as well. Okay. Now, the easiest thing is this. Now, I have the API key done. I have the module specified. I'm just going to click F8 and see if it works. And it's a new version of PS Windows Admin Center that I'm publishing right now. If you go back, I have PS Windows Admin Center here, which is of version 1001. Let's see what's going on. Very good. The package is invalid. May not contain spaces. Okay. I just updated that. So let's go remove this. It's not the right way of doing things, but for the sake of this demo, let me finish it. Let's give it a try one more time. Yep, that's published. It'll take a few minutes before it appears here. Right? Let's move on. All right, so how you can get involved? Right, apart from what I've shown, right, writing blogs, writing books, writing, supporting on the forums and so on, there's some of the other avenues that you have. You can participate in the community calls, the PowerShell community calls for PowerShell Core and DSC and so on. You can give your feedback, respond to RFCs, so the lunch discussion yesterday, respond to RFCs, give you feedback on that as well, provide your thoughts on that. There's a PowerShell Slack channel that you can join, discuss questions, or ask questions, answer questions, and so on. There's a PowerShell Reddit. That's where a lot of discussions happen as well. Someone asks a question or someone posts a new link or new module, etc. there, and you can actually start discussing that there as well. Very useful information. Twitter, of course. Use a PowerShell hashtag PowerShell. You have a lot of people actually following that hashtag and then responding to questions and having discussions there as well. The last thing is the github.com/PowerShell organization. There's multiple repositories you can contribute to. It's not just about developers, C# guys or anyone. It's about PowerShell people as well. I mean, people who write scripts also. You can go look at the issues there, contribute your code. You can fix bugs or ask for new features and so on. Have a lively discussion there as well. Like Joey mentioned yesterday and Jeffrey talked about it, PowerShell is really about you, the community, right? Has been never been a more important time for you as a community here. All right, that's all I had. Any questions? That's good. I think the lunch is waiting. See you guys.